Well, that's not good. 5 volts and going down. Let's see what it shows on the scan tool. Well, that's weird. It shows 11 volts here at the DLC. Let's look at the data. Well, it's definitely not charging. It's only 11.3 volts, 11.4 volts in the data list, but yet the voltmeter across the battery shows much lower than that. So it's definitely not charging. I had a bad connection on my voltmeter lead. I tweaked my positive lead here and I got a concurrent reading with the scanner, 11.5 volts at the battery. And the belt is tight and it's spinning the alternator, so it's probably in need of an alternator. Unfortunately, these are not fun to replace. So to see the alternator, you have to take the skid plate off here. And obviously the bolts have been broken in here before. Somebody's drilled, put a self-tapper in there. This one's broken on this side. This one was self-tapped in there. Let's see, where is the bolt? Well, regardless, it's broken off, stripped. Anyways, the alternator lives up there. There is the alternator. There's some kind of oily residue coming down here. I thought it was power steering fluid, but it's really sticky. So I'm wondering if somebody sprayed belt dressing on the belt, because it's on the alternator pulley up here. It's not recommended to use belt dressing on these type of belts. I think somebody did. I think somebody sprayed belt dressing on the belt. That's why it was squeaking. I don't think that's power steering fluid. Now, to get this alternator out of here is a bit of a challenge. I made a video on one before. Those through bolts on the alternator tend to corrode in there. Yeah, well, let's see if we can get at it through the wheel well. Let's take the wheel off. I see on the another note, it has new lower control arms and new struts, new outer tie rod ends on both sides, which is a good thing. There's that alternator. You can barely see it. I'm going to pop the cap off and check for power at the battery terminal first, and then look at the other electrical circuits, see if we can qualify at least this voltage sensing circuit. I didn't see the charge indicator light on the dash, but I'm not sure if this actually has one, because it does have a voltmeter. So there are 5 wires to the alternator: the big battery cable, which should be live all the time, the S wire, which comes from this alternator sense fuse, that should be live all the time, the IG wire, pin 2, which is key switch power from 7.5 amp fuse, and then the monitor wire that goes between the alternator and the computer ECM. I think the ECM just monitors the load on the alternator. It's 90% likely the alternator has failed, but we're going to qualify at least these 3 wires, because I can do that easily by unplugging them and load testing them with a headlight. This comes from a 5 amp fuse. This one comes from 140 or 180 amp fuse, depending on what alternator it's got. And this one comes from a 7.5 amp ignition fuse. So we're going to qualify those 3 wires at the alternator. So I got the alternator plug off the alternator. You have to push this little tab. And I got this connector unplugged. I don't know what it's for, but it was in my way. It was on a little bracket here that's rotted off. So 3 of these 4 wires in here should have power. I have the key on, so one of them's key switched and 2 are live all the time. And this battery bolt here should be powered as well, so I'm going to get set up here to test these. I'm using a headlight connected to the negative battery post. So I'm going to go to the battery cable, and it should light the headlight. Get through the oxidation here. So we got power at the battery cable. Now I don't know which one of these 3 wires is which, but there's 1, there's 2, should be 3. That's 1, that's 2, Should be 3 wires with power. I wonder if that alternator fuse is blown. But it was charging, so that's weird. I wonder if it has to be running. I'll double check the schematic. So I thought I'd try it running. And it's the green wire. Let's look in here and see which one's the green wire. That one's the green wire. Black and orange, black and yellow. So I think that red wire is supposed to be power all the time. I'm going to double check the schematic again. So I misread the schematic. There's only 2 wires that are live. This black wire here comes from the indicator light in the dash. So if I put the headlight on there, it should light the indicator light in the dash because it will turn on through that circuit. So the 2 wires that are supposed to be powered plus the battery cable are powered. I misread the diagram. There's a black wire. So I'm going to see if the indicator light is on the dash. So you can see the battery indicator light underneath the voltmeter. And I have a battery charger on it set at 13.5 volts so it doesn't die. I'm going to take that ground off, that headlight off there. So as you can see, the charge indicator light is off the dash, and it wasn't on before, so there's a problem with the voltage regulator in that alternator, or brushes are wore out. So you're probably wondering why I go to all the trouble of testing the wires. Well, because you can see it's not 5 minutes to change that alternator, and I'd hate like hell to change it and have the same problem afterwards. So to get the serpentine belt off, there's a belt tensioner you have to get from underneath, 14 mil socket. But Toyota felt sorry for us here, so they put a retaining hole in there so that you can lock that tensioner in the released position so you can slip the belt off. That's kind of nice. I wish the last RAV4 I just changed the belt on this morning had that. So remove the banjo bolt from the power steering pressure line and tuck it over towards the rad. Remove the low pressure return line at the bottom of the pump. Hose clamp. Toyota's so proud of this alternator they built the truck around it, so you have to take this power steering pump off. There's 2 bolts through the pulley. You can get out with a short socket and a 1-inch extension and a ratchet. They're 14 mil. You can see there's a bolt directly behind there on the alternator, and I think there's another one back here as well. So the pump has to come off. Yeah, let's go. So once you get the power steering pump out of the way, and it's going to be wedged in there because of this sliding sleeve here, we'll have to reposition that, clean that off. You can get the 2 top bolts, but the 2 bottom bolts are a challenge. They're down underneath here. Got to go from underneath. At least I had to last time. Hopefully they're not seized in the rectangular bosses. Well, there's the pesky alternator out. The top 2 bolts are easy. The bottom bolts are a challenge. This one here is behind the transmission cooler lines. There's a 90-degree bracket that bolts to the front, carries the wire up to the output shaft, output stud, and it holds the transmission lines, and it goes over top of this. So you have to remove that bracket, pull down on the lines gently, and go through the wheel well from underneath, and you can get this one through here, the back one through here with a universal joint. Now, before you put the new alternator on, there are 2 dowels, one there and one there. They have to be removed from there and put in the new alternator. So we're going to thread a tap in here because there's no ridge inside. So we're going to thread a tap in here and a bolt and tap it out from the back side. So I found if you use a 1/2-inch fine thread tap, you can tap the inside of the dowel. then thread a bolt in. And then use a punch. I tried to pull that dowel out with a pair of vice grips, and all you do is crumble it, so that thread on the inside doesn't hurt it. We're going to clean that up and do the same thing on the other one. There you go. Clean these up and put them in the new alternator. So there's everything reinstalled, alternator bolted in, serpentine belt installed, power steering lines on, electrical connector attached here, tie wrapped because the ear is rusted off. So we have to fill the power steering, clean the battery cables, and test the output of the alternator. So I changed the positive battery post cable with a marine stud style, which is very similar to the OE. This one's a little corroded. Fall gas. And I cleaned up the negative, and we're going to start it up. First we're going to see if the charge indicator light comes on with the key. So the charge indicator light should be in there, and it's on right there, and it should go off when we start it, and it should be charging. And I need to top up the power steering. I can hear it winding. Well, we're going to check the charging system voltage now. Well, I had the battery on trickle charge all the time that I was running it, and it's running at 13.9. So it is charging. Let's have a look at the alternator diode ripple.